What's good, y'all? You Dub back here again, here in 2022. Let's get into it. Now, on this channel, we have grown folks conversation. Alright? I am not an ideologue. I discuss all kinds of topics, and I'm open for discussion. On this video specifically, though, I'm not dealing with foolishness. Some people may dislike what I have to say, as you know, Ralph and them would say in Lord of the Flies, sucks to your ass more. Talking about Piggy. If you disagree with this video, understand you are being anti-science. If you disagree with this video, you are spewing nothing but dogma that is from an ideological standpoint. And if you disagree with this video, you're 90% likely to be speaking out of pure emotion, because I'm going to be discussing biology on all fronts, right? When discussing promiscuity. And yes, I said for both sexes, because promiscuity is a problem for both sexes. If it wasn't, anyone could just be sleeping with anyone and there's no problems. We know that to be horseshit. We know that to be a lie. So let us get down to the nitty gritty. First and foremost, what is promiscuity and what does it look like for men and women? And yes, it is different. Promiscuity is this. It is not simply having had multiple partners in your life. Most people will more than likely have them, especially if they get married and someone's a widow or a widower, which is why a woman's past actually matters a hell of a lot. It actually does. Men's do too, but women typically care less, depending on, their ages. But a woman's past definitely does matter. Here's the thing. A woman being promiscuous will look like this. She has more than 2 sexual partners in a year. Yes, that would mean 1 every 6 months. Why do I cap it there? From a biological sense. Think about, how would she determine who's the father of her children or child? Multiple partners in that window, you have paternity questions. There should never be paternity questions on who the father of the children are or child. Okay. A man, more than 4 women in a single year. That is 1 every 3 months. Once again, there should not be a question on who the father of the children are. And I'm spacing out by months rather than multiple times, because if you're doing it multiple times, then you're by multiple men or multiple women simultaneously. You're inherently being promiscuous. But over that extended period of time, and the reason I'm also differentiating between men and women is that women have more access to potentiality of multiple men. They also need to be more selective than men do, because they have a womb, because they can get pregnant. Again, we must talk about the biology. From a biological standpoint, Biology 101 says what? What is the purpose of sex? It is to reproduce. Period. Pleasure is not the purpose of sex. I'm not saying sex should not be pleasurable. I'm not saying an emotional bond shouldn't happen. But from a purely biological, if you would say animalistic standpoint, it is reproduction. Now, why do we have pleasure and why is there an emotional bond? Let us delve into that. We have pleasure for 4 reasons. Number 1, from a man's standpoint, it is a reward-based aspect. I want to do this, so it is pleasurable for me to have sex. From number 2, from a woman's standpoint, it is pleasurable because otherwise she will be adverse to having sex. In fact, some women's first time, they talk about the psychological trauma. Part of the reason why rape is such a horrible thing for a woman is the trauma that it induces on her. Okay? Thirdly, why is it pleasurable? So that frequency can occur, which then would produce more offspring, which would then produce the survival of the species. Fourthly, if it's pleasurable, you're more than likely to stay. Part of the reason sex is so important in relationships, typically. Even amongst asexual couples, pleasure incentivizes that couple who is asexual or who has those tendencies to want to have sex. If you ever dealt with a partner who is asexual, you will understand this. Or possibly you're dealing with one, it'll help you understand. It was like, even though they, from us, might not be wired to, or someone who even has a low libido, they'll still eventually desire to have sex. Okay? Now, why is there an emotional component? You have 5 reasons why there's an emotional component. Number 1, a man will want to stay. Why is that important? Because if a man doesn't stay, then a woman is left screwed, especially in survival situations. She's with her and the child. The emotional bond with him and the child will cause him to want to be a man for it, will cause for protection, provision, guidance / leadership, provision of masculinity towards her and their children. Number 2, the emotional bond. It helps with women's mental health. Okay? If a woman is fractured emotionally and she's attached, it fucks with her mental health. Thirdly, why the emotional bond is connected. It builds the family unit, which in thus builds an extended family, which thus builds a tribe. Which goes into number 4, humans are social creatures. We're not meant to be isolated and alone, even if we can survive. That's why the feeling of loneliness comes up, because that emotional connection and bond ties us together. Fifthly, you build and construct a society with those emotional bonds. You're also less likely to be destructive, especially when you're talking about the concept of men who deal in the kinetic energy while women are passive. Women are also less likely to destroy. They're less likely, if they're emotionally stable, they're less likely to do certain the toxic traits that we often associate with females. Okay. Now, 2 things. We can do entirely separate videos on polygamy and polyamorous. Right? But let us address these from a biological standpoint. Can a woman be polygamous or whatever the reverse for a woman is? Really, no. Here's why. Am I telling people what to do? No, this video is not me dogmatically. We are talking the sciences. Here's why polygamy does not work for women. A woman has a womb, a singular womb. Also, a woman can be laid up for 9 months potentially. A woman also, on average, is not as physically strong as a man. A woman also has things such as a period, a woman's hormonal state, and more. A woman also, the more men she deals with, the more detached she will be. Remember I talk about that psychological trauma? Yeah. A man, on the other hand, and I'm not promoting, but this is the reality why men can work with polygamy. Number 1, a man would need to have the resources to be able to deal with multiple wives. Wives, not mistresses, not concubines, not subjects, even though you can work into that aspect. But technically, polygamy is about wives, not girlfriends, not side chicks, none of that. No. Polygamy is about wives. So if it's a wife, a man is financially responsible for taking care of his family. Meaning he's financially responsible for any of the women, his wives, and as a husband, and any of the offspring that are his. Which is why paternity fraud is so damaging to men, because the man's on the hook for those children, for those kids. Okay. Number 2, why polygamy? That is a status symbol. The majority of men cannot even afford to be polygamous. Number 3, not only is it a status symbol, it is more so, does he have the ability to protect from a territorial standpoint? You can go into lions and other species with this aspect. But that means, again, with the provision, but also the protection. That's why you would have kings and aristocrats, because they have the literal external world influenced by their very being. And being thus, they can do that. Women don't do that, especially if we're talking feminine. That's why women need numbers, or typically need the assistance of men, right? Because if we're talking to get into a fight or a war, good luck. Not saying women are not capable at all, but let's talk about the averages. Okay. So here's the thing. The average man usually doesn't even desire to be with a woman. And here's the thing. With the resources and such, women will work together, especially if it's designed in a polygamous society. But they're more prone to be, because they feel secure with that man of high status, power, and wealth, etc. Typically, obviously, that you're not going to have these problems. They're secure, they're fine. And for some of them, they're like, oh, I don't have to deal with the headache with the sex all the time, da da da. But for the average man, he only wants one solid ride or die chick. He only wants one solid wife, one solid woman in his life who he can go to, he can confide with, who provides the femininity, etc. Right? He's not looking for all of that. And if he's out here like that, that usually means he's not getting at home. You understand? So let's move on to polygamy, because we can talk about polygamy more in another video. Polyamorous does not work under 30. We'll get into why. But who are the majority who try to practice polyamory? Under 30. From a man's perspective, why a man would try to be polyamorous is one of 4 causes. Number 1, he's emotionally unavailable, meaning he doesn't know how to develop emotional bonds, which means he's probably had stunted growth with his relationship with his mother and any women he's ever dealt with. He's probably had heartbreaking, etc. Number 2, why a man would want to be polyamorous, he's allowing for his animalistic, bestial tendencies to try to just spread his seed. No self-control, no discipline, which is not masculine, which is not being a man. Number 3, he doesn't care about the consequences of his actions. Because any man worth his salt realizes that the more I involve with, whether it be spreading of STDs, whether it be, again, having children, all kinds of out of wedlock, all kinds of children, child support, things of that nature, he's going to be mindful of the women he involves. And lastly, more than likely his mental health and emotional health are scarred and not in the most stable place. Because a man who's stable emotionally and mentally does not even want to deal with multiple women. Because even dealing with one woman, learning that one woman, that's an investment, and it's rough. It's rough. Every man, the old lady, he might complain, but that's his old lady. He knows her ways, and he's there. He's stuck. He's loyal. Women, why polyamorous doesn't work on the 30s? Number 1, her hormones are all over the place. So she wants it because each different guy can fill a void of hers. Number 2, she wants to try different dick. And we can get into the whole thing, but again, that's for a separate video. Number 3, she herself is immature and is not in tune with her womanly feminine self. Because her womanly feminine self would tell her not to move around and operate like that. And number 4, she's been brainwashed, indoctrinated, and programmed by certain ideologies that lead to self-destructive lifestyles. And again, we can talk about that at another point. Now, why it can work over 30 is because of different hardwiring. But polyamorous over 30 leads more towards what? Polygamy. Right? Except, here's the thing. Polyamorous for a woman over 30 looks entirely different than it does when she's in her 20s. Her polyamorous are going to be very limited numbers. And they're going to be long time numbers. So is a man's, but it's from a different point of view. So pretty much the polyamorous over 30 is more than likely going to be like 3 or less partners. Usually 2 or less partners. Usually one solid one and one vetted out other partner. And often it's people of the same age bracket who've been through or open relationships and things we can get into as to that whole dynamic. So it's really cutting down on promiscuous behavior as a whole, which is why these things seemingly work for years. Again, not promoting anything, just talking about the reality. So let us move on. Why is promiscuity bad for both sexes? Let's begin with men. Number 1, promiscuity makes for a man not to emotionally develop. Yes, you heard me correctly. A man needs to learn how to be alone or needs to learn how to deal with the people in his circle. If a man has too many people around his life, he's not developing himself from a psychological standpoint. He's being very loose and overly liberal with his physical well being, which will affect his health eventually. And we can get into that later or in another time. He's not allowing himself to emotionally mature as a man. He's not addressing his spiritual health and his path, which is why you see men a lot of times become monks and things of that nature, because he has to fix what's within. He has to grow his internal strength, right? And all of that, you say that's biological. Well, yeah, then I can look at the biological aspects or just observe, right? Any man who is not disciplined, what is he? He develops self-destructive patterns. He's more prone to be depressed and suicidal. Doesn't know how to be alone. He's not going to build wealth. And that's another thing, because you're not fully invested in anything, or your investments are all over the place, that it ups his stress level, which leads to cardiac problems, leads to neurological problems, and more that we can address, right? It leads to, again, substance abuse, self-destructive patterns, which can lead to like alcohol, destruction of one's liver, destruction of the kidneys, potentiality of, again, STDs, which affects his reproductive organs and more, destruction of urinary system, digestive system, you name it, right? All kinds of destructive aspects. Now, for a woman, well, okay, let's stick with the man. That was one aspect. Promiscuity also has him potentiality on the hook for so many financial burdens that he cannot deal with. Most men don't make that much. So by being promiscuous, he's not only is it just children, because everybody just looks at the children aspect, but he's probably whining and dining multiple women, which means that's income coming out the door that he's not getting back, and he's not even getting a true return on the investment. Or in the case of prostitutes, escorts, etc., women of the night, adult entertainment, porn, if he's paying for it. You can go into all these factors. That is income coming out the door. So whether he has a family or not, that is not building up him as a man to be a provider in that aspect. Also, promiscuity hurts men. Again, you can go into the whole STD aspect. But from the aspect of his emotional health, right? Why is he even being promiscuous to begin with? He's not addressing all the underlying traumas and the things that he has even dealt with or he's been taught as a child. And until he addresses those, he will never be able to build any solid relationships, if ever. Okay? So even if he, and another thing with promiscuity, even if he, say, gets married, because he's not addressed those underlying issues, all of that will come back to haunt him in that relationship. So he'll be through multiple wives. Or he'll pick a woman who, because he doesn't know how to vet women, because that's the thing about it, being promiscuous leaves you not to vetting. A man needs to vet. Both sexes need to vet, but a man definitely needs to vet, because if a man doesn't vet, then he's inviting the wrong type of women. He's inviting them users, them gold diggers, the women who are loose with the cooch, yes, some would say, loose as a goose. Women who have no inhibitions, women who are terrible to be mothers and whatnot. And there are some females out here who we know, he would just bust and lay down with anything old thing if he's not disciplined and in sexual control. Now, for a female, for a woman, number one, unlike men, she has one womb. Now, one thing I'll put in the caveat with men, one last thing, because I'm going to address this with women as well. Men, well, I'll address it in the biological clock. Never mind. That'll be the final thing in this video. So back to it. Why promiscuity is bad for women? Number one, she has a singular womb. She absorbs. Women absorb. They absorb semen, right? They absorb energy. They absorb a man's patterns. They absorb everything that we can get into. And again, that's a deeper discussion for another time. But women are sponges, right? Even and sponges are supposed to filter feed, so keep that in mind. A woman, another thing about it, not only does she, and again, we'll get into the eggs and stuff in the biological clock. Not only does she have a limited number, the men she's with are supposed to help train her to the patterns. She will know the patterns of the man. She will adapt to his penis. She will adapt to his ways. She will adapt if she submits and gets what is programmed. She doesn't learn order and structure if she's dealing with multiple males. She also doesn't learn how to build that emotional attachment, which will actually affect her kids, because a lot of times the sons of the men, they hate the men, thus they hate the sons. They'll hate the look of it. So she won't learn to develop that emotional attachment to her children. She won't develop, she will also have stunted growth. She will be as if she is a child or an adolescent in her mind and in her emotional. She won't know how to control. She will look for instant gratification. That's part of the reason of the promiscuity. She won't know how to be stable. She will be an emotional nightmare. She will be a basket case. And here's the thing. Into her 30s, if she hasn't learned that by her 30s, then her biological hardwiring will start taking over and whatnot. Her hormones, but by that point, she will either be so physically damaged and possibly psychologically damaged that it's over with. Also, men are less prone to want to deal with her ass. Okay? Besides, and even sexually, they're less prone. Especially if they're the type that's just trying to bust it down and slide through and not wanting a relationship. So she will just be getting with fleeing after fleeing after fleeing. And even if she has a guy who's actually he's like, okay, I understand you have a past, but I'm willing to deal with that and take that on. She won't even know how to recognize him, or he will be adverse to her. She will push away, reject, friend zone, distance herself from his energy, his aspect. Maybe she's not used to masculinity or his actual, protective nature, his provision. She will want that. She will desire that deep down, but she won't know how to accept that into her life. And she won't know how to mold her life into his. She won't know how to be in alignment with him. So you'll hear a lot of this stuff talked about from a moral aspect, but it really does have a basis in the biology. So the morality and the biology are interlocked, interconnected. You know what I'm saying? Now, finally, biological clock. Without making this video too long, right? I didn't want to make this like over 30 minutes. So, from a biological clock, both sexes have one. People that say men don't have a biological clock, y'all aren't looking at the reality. 4 things about men's biological clock. Number 1, his health, his sexual and physical health. When he is younger, he's typically better than when he's older. That is just a fact. On law of averages, that is the reality. Number 2, his potency, efficiency, and overall well-being of his sperm are better when he is younger than when he is older. Doesn't mean he can't get a woman pregnant when he's older, but it's much more unlikely, as well as the good on the health of the children. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but it becomes Russian roulette. Number 3, his ability to survive health-wise for his children and his wife. If he's older, he's more likely to die. I hate to be morbid, but we have to call it what it is. And last and most importantly, if he develops those aspects when he's young, he's able to establish and provide generational wealth. If he doesn't, then that means he's probably going to struggle for much of his life. You see, a man in his 20s is trying to literally find himself, figure out his life. By the time in his 30s, he should be beginning to establish that actual path. And by his 40s, which is middle age and onward, he should be walking that path. That's how it works biologically for men. Women, on the hand, again, limited number of eggs, number 1. Unlike a man who can reproduce, limited number of eggs, on her biological clock. Number two, they wear down. The older she gets, the less likely they will be able to fertilize, or the mental, health issues, uh, uh, biological issues, come out deformities and things of that nature. So her prime is between 20 to about 37, honestly. Younger can happen, but you have problems. Older than that, you know you're running into problems, or she just can't. She can't even get pregnant anymore. And I said 37. That's me being very liberal. It's really 35, but 37, there's a window. But she needs to be having kids before that. Otherwise, you will start to see the effects of it, right? And which is why you'll see women's the biological hardwiring and the hormonal state goes. Now, for both sexes, this is part of the reason why Congress, to be a congressman and congresswoman, both sexes do not, uh, the brain doesn't fully begin to start to settle down to 25. Okay, I can go in the stages of development, but it's 25. 27 hormonally, really for both sexes, honestly. Um, so you have these aspects. Also, woman promiscuity. DNA can be left from different men, right? DNA, and which can affect, again, the children. Also, different sperm will fight it out, even amongst a man, but different sperm will fight it out to, impregnate a woman. And another man's dick will dig out the sperm. People don't like to talk about it, but it really will. Um, Biological clockwise, she will, by 30, the maternal instinct should be kicking in. Now, here's the problem. If she's not been able to keep either long-term relationships, or if she is constantly abusing things like birth control, or constantly jumping from dick to dick, more or less, she won't, by the time she's in her prime maternal years, know how to settle down and nest. She will do nesting, but it will be for the wrong men. Hear that a lot. Again, a lot of these things that are coming out sociologically are based on biological imperatives. And lastly, to keep it, concise, a woman's biological clock indicates also her maturity level. Now, that doesn't mean that a woman will innately be more mature if she's 40 than a 20-year-old. That's not what I mean. I mean so from a maturity aspect of how she will maneuver and function in society. A woman in her younger years should be honestly looking for a man. And I'm not telling people, we can have that discussion at another point, but literally, they are hardwired to look for a man, to look for a mate. Their 30s, they are hardwired to, again, you have the maiden, the mother, and the crone, the triple goddess, as some call it, the three, or as I say, the three stages of a woman's life. Now, women can embody that all at once, and it's very few, but these are the three stages. Maiden, most fertile, the most, usually people say the most attractive. In her 30s, into her 40s, the motherly phase, right? Where it's the nurturing. And so by her, you can start to go into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, etc. That is the crone. That is when she's, the grandmother, the wisdom, etc., etc. This is the natural progression of a woman's biological clock. And yes, you can say, well, then why is it that some women, premenopause, whatever, 40s, their sex drive? Sure. That also goes to locking her man in so that he will remain to provide for the family unit. People don't like to have this kind of conversation. There are biological imperatives to all of this. It's not just, oh, I feel. Where do you think those feelings come from? It's your body, your mind, your subconscious, and all that telling you this is what you're supposed to be doing for both men and women. So yes, promiscuity destroys both men and women. But again, we can go into a lot of these nuanced discussions in further videos. But I thought at this point in time, it is an imperative discussion that should be had on this channel. And if you have any other comments, any viewpoints, please, by all means, in the comment section. I'm looking I have these kind of discussions all the time, and I'm looking to have an open, free, civil, respectful, mature dialogue. I'm not telling you what to do, but these are some of the biological reasons as to why promiscuity is so devastating and destructive to human beings as a whole. All right, y'all. Have a beautiful day, beautiful night. Peace. Keep safe. Be responsible and wise in your sexual conduct as men and women. Again, this isn't telling you what to do. It's just giving you reasonings out of how to navigate and move so that by the time you're older, you haven't made a bunch of mistakes. If you're younger, pay very much attention to how you navigate because that shit is just baggage and it will destroy you if you are not careful for both men and women.